Piracy. Can a three strikes policy really work?
Or is it simply an availability issue?
Welcome to Vertical Hold, the tech show where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm here with a man who can remember when Tab was a cola rather than a Samsung product line, Adam Turner. Adam, what's happening in tech news?
New South Wales has followed Victoria in cracking down on the UberX ride-sharing service, issuing drivers with $2,500 fines. UberX lets anyone over 23 offer strangers a lift for money, but they must prove that they have a clean driving record and no criminal history.
With the end of the financial year looming, the Australian Tax Office is reportedly looking into any expenses claims related to electronics. As such, if you're thinking of sliding a laptop or a sneaky tablet past the taxman come June 30th, it might be worth thinking again.
SMS fees look set to drop as the consumer watchdog steps in to regulate wholesale pricing. The ACCC has accused the Australian telcos of deliberately charging each other too much when transferring text messages between networks so they can pass those charges on to end customers.
Samsung's unveiled its latest tablet at a glitzy event in New York's Madison Square Garden. The Galaxy Tab Z's differentiation point against the millions of other Galaxy Tabs that Samsung would very much like you to buy is the high quality of its display screen. At the same time, the company has also fixed a persistent and really annoying bug for Australian Galaxy buyers, where the dock used to be locked such that you couldn't edit it if you were using the company's TouchWiz launcher.
So, Alex, the piracy debate is back in the headlines in Australia, and they're talking about three strikes laws. Now, what exactly does a three strikes law mean?
Okay, so say you've downloaded a torrent of episode 7 of Game of Thrones and...
No, who? What? Me? No. Never.
I
didn't do anything.
Well, yeah. I think we should clarify at this point that both of us as content creators kind of do believe in the idea of being paid for the content you produce. But we'll get to that in a minute.
Yes.
Let's say for the sake of theoretical argument...
Theoretically, someone who's not in this room...
You downloaded episode 7 of the recent series of Game of Thrones, but you've done it in a way that you were publicly identifiable by the copyright holders.
Yes.
That's your first strike. You get sent some kind of warning thing saying, hey, look, this isn't legally on, and this is your first warning. You go, well, stuff that, don't really care, what could the consequences be? You download episode 8. That's your second strike. And it's a more severe warning pointing out that a three strikes law, if enacted, is in place. You go for episode 9, and that's where they actually pursue you to the full extent of the law as it stands. If you're old enough to remember the dreadful copyright warnings that used to scroll past on VHS tapes, it's those kind of penalties you'd then be looking at after falling foul of the kind of three strikes law. Now, what's interesting here, of course, is that from a strictly legal point of view, of course, if it could be proven that you were in fact guilty of copyright infringement, and there's this whole separate thing around theft, which I think is just a blurring argument for a lot of people who have an overinflated sense of entitlement. But leaving that one aside...
Yeah, I'd actually agree with that. People are very good at saying it's not theft, whereas if they did the exact same thing and took the movie from JB Hi-Fi, they wouldn't try to say they weren't stealing it. They're doing the equivalent. If they want to do it, that's fine, but don't try to pretend that what you're doing is not stealing. Basically, just be upfront about it.
That is such a side diversion to me. It's such a muddying the waters of, well, it's fine because you're using the wrong term. Well, no, stuff that. In any case, technically speaking, right now, legally, if you could prove it, there is nothing stopping the copyright holders from actually pursuing people for this kind of infringement. Largely to date in Australia, that's really only happened where they've had someone being the originator of a pirated copy.
Basically running a ring rather than being the end guy.
Well, not even necessarily running a ring, making something available. There was a case a number of years back for the Super Mario Brothers game for the Wii, where a guy up in Brisbane, in fact, put a copy up on the net for people to grab. It was traced back to him and he got hit with a very, very hefty fine. And honestly, I've got to say, I don't have a great deal of sympathy in that case.
But he was sharing it. He was the one who was providing it rather than the one who was downloading it, I guess.
Absolutely. But either thing is still a copyright infringement issue. So in some ways, the three strikes thing is sort of intended to kind of mollify this thing and sort of intended to educate. It has been put in place in other countries.
But it hasn't necessarily worked. I saw there was a report from Monash University that's been cited in the press, I think it was from last year, that looked at what they did in France and New Zealand and the UK and said in the end it wasn't that effective. But then you'll find other reports that says it is, so everyone seems to call on the report that backs their point of view.
Absolutely.
Which is what reports are for,
look, this is totally true of the piracy debate in total, because there's so many kind of muddy figures out there that you can spin one way or the other. The other interesting thing around the 3 strikes laws at the moment is that nobody seems to quite know how it's going to work. It looks as though the Attorney General is siding strongly with the copyright holders who would
really? Say it's not
I know,
so.
Isn't
he there to protect our interests too?
But it looks as though he's siding with their interpretation, which it seems would favour a model where ISPs had to pursue this kind of work of chasing up,
it was their job to sort it out.
The ISPs propose a different model wherein the copyright holders are the ones who've actually got to do that expensive legwork. Quite where that ends up will be interesting to see, especially in the light of the fact that one of the most prominent cases around this saw the movie studios taking on iiNet and losing on this kind of basis, on the basis of, well, are the ISPs actually the ones enabling this kind of infringement? Do they have a role to play in this case?
Well, that's where they were hoping to pretty much seal the deal right there. They were hoping to beat iiNet and then force them to put the only way that someone like an ISP like iiNet would get out of being in trouble in future is if they did what they were told in terms of enforcing this stuff. But it didn't all go to plan because iiNet won the case, and that threw a big spanner in the works.
Yeah, I mean, the three strikes model is an interesting one, and I've got to be honest, I'm yet to see a better alternative.
Yeah, well, I can see the sense in it's a graduated response. One of the things that you haven't raised and that people raise sometimes is the talk of cutting off your internet access. Now, that's something that I don't know whether or not...
That's often cited as part of the third step.
But whether or not they will do it is what we don't know. They're still being deliberately a bit vague about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and look, some of this also falls back on the fact that, as I said before, technically speaking, the copyright holders could pursue people, individuals, straight away. First offence,
Yeah.
It's
they're on record as saying they don't want to do that.
The third murder I did that was the important one.
Yeah.
But they can pursue them straight away, but they don't want to, at least in part because of the difficulty of doing it, and we can kind of get onto that in a minute, but also because of the PR implications. If they're suddenly seeking $40,000 off a single mum for a Wiggles DVD that costs $10, that doesn't look so good for them.
And that's pretty much what happened in the US. They were suing little old ladies for downloading songs when it turns out it was their grandkids that did it. And the copyright police in Australia have been on the record in the past as saying they don't want to do that. What used to be AFAC, Australian Federation Against Copyright Theft, they decided that was too uncool. They've changed their name. I can't remember what the new name is, but the same kind of thing. They said to me a couple of years ago, we've got no interest in kicking down people's doors and dragging people out. They don't want the bad PR. It's not the way they want to do it. And as you say, if it's a choice between that and some kind of graduated 3 strikes response, maybe the 3 strike system doesn't look so bad.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the other thing to take in mind here is I think it's undeniable, there is always going to be a kind of bottom-feeding sector that is just going to try and steal stuff because they can. They are not going to pay for it. And frankly, I've got to say, it actually annoys me when people say, oh, well, we've got a right to watch it. No, you don't. I firmly and strongly believe if you go to the trouble, whether it's trouble in time, trouble in expense, or both, to create a thing, be it a piece of music, be it a video, whatever, it's yours. It's yours to do with as you like. And just because we live in a digital age where the means of reproduction are quite simple, does not automatically inflate out to everyone has the right to everything. I think you, as a creator, whoever the creator might be, whether that is a movie studio or an individual, I think should have that right to say, this is my thing and I want it treated this way.
What I think's interesting at the moment is this argument that's going on in Australia between the big content providers, your road shows and your villages and stuff like that, and between Google. Whereas Google come out and say piracy is pretty much an issue of availability and pricing. If you do what you've done with Game of Thrones and lock it away and say that there's only one way to get it and you have to get to Foxtel, well, of course, a lot of people are then going to feel that you've taken away what that was a legitimate way to buy it, and they don't want to do that. If you make content easily available, easy to pay for, most people will do the right thing. Now, then the copyright people like your Hoyts in your village turn around and go, oh, Google, shut up, what the hell would you know? You don't pay any tax anyway, which is totally irrelevant to the conversation. And why don't you just magically block all this stuff and stop it happening? it's really interesting that the content providers in this country, and the TV networks are a really good example, seem to want to take the moral high ground, as in they're so hard done by, and it's not fair that people go and get their content from somewhere else, and they should play by their rules. And they seem to be totally oblivious to the fact that they created this problem in the first place. There is a reason why Australians are the world's biggest pirates. There are reasons why Australians go to the internet for their TV shows and have done for more than a decade. Because our networks treat us like idiots. We're going back to Star Trek in the 90s and stuff like that, and The Sopranos.
Look,
but what I'm saying, just let me
right.
finish this bit. They've created the problem. They're complaining about the problem, yet don't seem to want to admit that it's a problem they created by treating us like idiots for 20 years. They drove us away, and now that they're complaining that we won't come back, and they're trying to take the moral high ground when it was them being such bastards in the first place that created the problem. That's what annoys me, is they don't even see that. If they could just acknowledge they were the problem,
I think it's slightly different than that.
Yeah.
And I think it is that mix that I was talking about just before of old model and new model.
Yeah.
They are clinging for dear life to their buggy whip manufacturing
kicking
processes
and screaming.
that say that this is how movies go, this is how TV goes.
Yeah.
And in an internet age, it doesn't. The issue is still working out, okay, how do you make this work? How do you make TV and movie production worthwhile? Because ultimately, people do need to be paid, not just absolute content creators, but also the people who are manning the cameras, the lighting people, the makeup. It's complicated stuff, and that still needs a kind of fix. That's new model stuff. They're sticking very rigidly to old model thinking. I mean, you're right. The CEO of Village Roadshow, I think it was, came out recently and said, the availability issue just isn't a thing. And it's like, well, no, you don't get it. You don't get where this is going. And at some point, somebody, I think, is going to come in and absolutely eat their lunch in terms of distribution. Having said that, I don't think those models, just as the internet has not killed TV, TV did not kill radio or newspapers, I don't think that they are models that are fundamentally absolutely incompatible with each other. It's at least a mixed mode for the time being, with some of those models shrinking in importance.
The thing they don't seem to grasp, though, is they're finally doing the right thing. They're offering things like catch-up TV services and subscription services, and they don't understand why Australians won't use them. But they've spent 20 years training us not to. They've spent 20 years training us that the only way to get to watch what you want when you want is to go and steal it, because the networks are going to treat us like idiots. They've taken so long to come around to doing the right thing that they've already trained us not to use these services, and now they don't understand why we won't. That's what I think is interesting. And until they acknowledge that problem and realise that they are actually part of the problem, I don't think they're ever going to come to a real solution.
Well, they don't really have a financial imperative to do that, because if they do that, they're basically saying, well, every other production can just come here and distribute directly. And that's the other challenge that they face. That if you do move to a model of direct distribution for TV programs, well, what exactly is it that a Village Roadshow does? What exactly is it that Channel 9 does? What exactly is
That's
it
not my
that a Foxtel
problem, though,
does?
necessarily.
No.
If I get to watch what I want, it's not my job to keep them in a job.
No, that's not a consumer's problem, but that's the mindset they've got. They're protecting the business that they've got. And look, I mean, I kind of get why they do that. But having said that, yes, as a consumer who wants to watch stuff, I want to watch stuff. Now, I want to pay for it as well. Yeah. This brings up your secondary problem, which is that almost nobody can agree on what a good price is relative to a bunch of factors. It's not just a case of, well, a TV episode should cost $4. Does it cost $4 in the US? Does it cost $4 here? Are they the same digital bits? Are people being paid the same wages? And what does that do to the cost of production, and where do you do production? It is actually, I think, a more complicated topic than a lot of people are really willing to let on. Instead, they just fall back behind, as we said before, the whole, oh, well, it's not stealing, they never would have paid for it anyway.
Well, some people will never pay for anything on principle, and I know that sounds a bit odd, but they will never pay for anything. You're never going to win these people over.
We've dismissed them already, pretty much.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is you're never going to win these people over. Nothing you do, you could make it 1 cent an episode and they still wouldn't pay.
But I'm not
the
so
people
much
in the
concerned,
middle who they have to
concerned
win.
with them. The issue
That's
is...
what I'm saying. We don't need to be concerned with them. We need to be concerned with the people in the middle who will do the right thing.
As soon as you say that an episode is worth $3 or whatever, and I think $3 is fine for an episode, and if you can get TV production or movie production or whatever working on a $3 model, then excellent. Bring it on. I will pay it. I think the vast majority of reasonable people will pay that. But the issue is, as soon as $3 becomes normalised, people will start to think, well, hang on, shouldn't it be $2? There is this downwards trend, this downwards push. You look at it, to throw it to a kind of slightly different market, you look at it in the kind of app environment that exists around smartphones now. When those were first kicking off, when the iPhone 3G first came out, software, typically, just to call it software, you were looking at, $10, $20, $100, $200 for a piece of software, and it did a thing.
A piece of desktop software, yeah.
Yes, a piece of desktop software, yeah, I should clarify. And it did a thing, and people generally, if they thought it was decent value, paid the sum for it. And again, yes, there was piracy, that kind of stuff too, and there still is. Apps come along at 99 cents, people start to think, oh, well, that's the new normal. So, why is a $5 app worth it? Oh, that's terribly, horribly expensive when you consider, well, actually, it's only $4 more than the 99-cent app, and maybe it's better. But people ignore that a lot of the time.
It's probably a 20th of what you would have paid for the same sort of thing on a desktop 5 years ago.
Exactly. Yeah. And now, an awful lot of that stuff has even shifted to either free or freemium, being either ad-supported or with in-app purchases, depending on what it is, kind of model. And people go, oh, well, why would I pay $1 for it? And I think you run the risk of TV and movie stuff going that way as well. As soon as you set a price, people will go, well, I want it cheaper. And that, again, that's human nature. There's not an easy answer to that one either.
But that's what free-to-air broadcast television is then, pretty much. It's a freemium model. You're not paying for it, but you have to sit in through the ads and all this kind of stuff to watch it. But that doesn't seem to be able to produce necessarily the kind of content that HBO can produce, because they can demand an arm and a leg out of people like Foxtel and use the money to make shows like Game of Thrones. So while it's an interesting model, it on its own is not delivering everything that we want. So we've got to find a way to make that other model work as well.
Yeah, it is a convoluted knot. Yeah. I mean, we could go on and on about this.
I think we just did.
All night long. And I guess, if you're watching this on YouTube, we'd be really interested in your thoughts. What do you think is a fair price for an episode? What do you think should be done about piracy? Not so much in your rants of, oh, these people are all evil money grubbers, and look, yeah, some of them are, some of them don't get it. But constructive stuff. What would you do to fix this particular problem?
So that about wraps it up for another episode of Vertical Hold. After watching all those DVD promo warnings, I'm off to steal a car.
You mean copyright infringe a car, right?
Yeah, sorry, copyright infringe a car.